We'll do a review in Likkutei Sichos in Chelek Lamed Gimel. This is volume 33. This is the first Sicha for the Parsha of Bamidbar. And this is a Rashi Sicha. And Rebbe is Mechadish, a Chidush Nifla, that when the Pasuk says, Ach esmate Levi loy tivkoid ve'esroishom loy tiso, that while the other Yidden were counted, but the tribe of Levi was not counted, then it says B'toich b'nei Yisrael, because the Yidden's numbers were just counted, but the Levi were not counted. The Rebbe speaks and explains that there's two aspects here. One aspect is Lois Sifkoid. Lois Sifkoid would be talking about the actual count, and Rosham Loisiso, which means to get the total number. And the Rebbe will explain that's why we have the two Pirushim in Rashi, and that's how we have an explanation in all the different details, because there are two aspects of here. Numbers, the Rebbe will also explain in Avodas Hashem how there is affected three different levels of mitzvos, Torah and Tefillah, and the Yisrael, Kohanim, Kohen Gadol, and all associated with the three different ways of counting and knowing the number, as we'll go through the Sikha step by step. Aleph, Bamidbar Aleph. So first, the Rebbe begins the pasuk in the verse, Ach esmate Levi loy sivkoid, ve'esreisham loy siso b'sech b'nei Yisrael. The pasuk finished beforehand counting all of the b'nei Yisrael, and the pasuk says, but the tribe of Levi, don't count them and don't raise their heads amongst the Bnei Yisrael. So they are not part of that count. This is as a continuation. First, the number of the Bnei Yisrael, but saying the Levi, you don't count. So Matik Rashi Esatevis, so Rashi quotes from the Posik the words Ach es mate Levi loisivkoit, that the Mate Levi don't count, umefarish. Rashi explains that Kedai hu ligyon shel melech liyes nimna levadoi. It's fitting, it's worth the legion of the king. The legion of the king, he's unique. Liyes nimna levadoi. He should be counted by himself, not together with the Bnei Yisrael, because he is ligyon shel melech. That's one pshat. Then Rashi says, Davar achar, another pshat. Tzofa HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'asido lamed gizeiro al kol hanimnim miben esrim shana v'maylo. That Hashem looked ahead, that in the future there was going to be a decree that all those that were counted from 20 and up, that was just counted the Bnei Yisrael, sheyamusu bamidbar, that they were destined, they were going to die in the desert. They were not going to go into Eretz Yisrael, as the Eibishter made the Gezerah later on with the Meraglim. So Hashem saw this ahead of time. Tzofa HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what's going to happen? Amar, so he said, Al yihu elu b'chlal. Let these, the Leviim, not be included in those that are counted from 20, which will not enter Eretz Yisrael, will die in the Midbar. These shouldn't be b'klal. Lifi shehem shali shaloi to'u be'egel, because they are mine. They did not err. They did not make a mistake with the egel, while the other Yidden mistakenly made the mistake and they followed and they worshipped the egel. But the Leviim didn't do it, so therefore they should not be included, and therefore we're not going to count them together with the others, and they are separate. These are the two reasons. So Rashi brings two reasons why they were counted separate. First of all, because they are deserving. The positive, because they deserve as being Ligyon Shel Melech, so they deserve their own counting as the legion of the king. And number two, because Hashem wanted to protect them, so they should not be part of the ones who were counted from 20 who died in the desert. So therefore, he counted them separately. Okay. So the thing is that the simple thing would be that what is Rashi's issue over here that Rashi's coming to teach us over here? So is Rashi coming to tell us? Up till now, we didn't learn that the Levim were counted. So is Rashi coming to tell us that don't make a mistake, the Levim were counted? If you're coming to this pasuk over here, Aches Mate Levi Loi Sifkoit, so you might think you're not counting them. Maybe they're not counted at all. So Rashi is coming to tell you, no, don't think they weren't counted. Rashi is telling you they were counted, but they were counted separate. The Rebbe argues now that that's not, Rashi has no doubt that they were counted. That's not what Rashi is coming to teach us. The only issue that Rashi has is, why weren't they counted together with the rest of the Bnei Yisrael? Why make them different? Not to teach us that they were counted, because as the Rebbe proves, that would have, if Rashi wanted to tell you that part, he would have been more clearly, as we will see now. But the issue that Rashi is addressing is, why do we separate the Levim from the rest of the Yidden in their counting? Rashi's issue was not that to tell us that they were counted. Don't make a mistake, because that doesn't say in the Rashi, as the Rebbe will explain. Now, once we'll understand what Rashi is coming to tell us, this will raise other questions on this Rashi. So let's go inside. So Rashi says, the Pashtus Loshon Rashi Nira, from the language reading the Rashi, it appears, it seems, it sees, we can see, she'ein kavonos lishloil hapirush, that Rashi is not intending here. What Rashi is trying to teach us is to negate the interpretation, the Aches Mate Levi Loi Sifkoit, when the pasuk says don't count Levi, so that it means don't count them at all. Hainu Shemate Levi Loi Nimna Klal. So you read the pasuk Aches Mate Levi Loi Sifkoit, don't count them. Rashi has a problem. What do you mean don't count them? They were counted. So Rashi is coming to tell you, Hainu Shemate Levi Loi Nimna Klal. Don't say that, because Rashi is coming to tell you that's not the case, that they weren't, because they were counted. But we're talking about, what is Rashi coming to teach us, that you should not say that they weren't counted at all. Umefarish. And Rashi does explain, Shagam Mate Levi Nimna. Rashi is coming to tell that he was counted. Okay, Mefurish Lakamen Beparsha, as explained later on, very clear, articulated in the Parsha, that they were counted. Eloshahu Nimna Levadi. It was counted on his own. So Rashi is saying, Leitifka, don't count them. That the meaning of Leitifka is don't count them together with count them alone. Not don't count them at all, but don't count them separate than everyone. Not to count them all together, but not to count them as part, but count them itself. If this was Rashi's intention over here, to make sure that we don't misinterpret al tifkoid, don't count at all. So Rashi should have emphasized the novelty, what he's trying to say over here, that they were counted. Shemata Levi Nimna Levade. He should have said first that the Mata Levi was counted by themselves. Because we had not yet mentioned, the Pasuk hadn't mentioned yet that they were counted. So Rashi should have said they were counted. And then he should have added the reasons why he was counted alone. Give the two reasons. So if Rashi's purpose is to teach us the meaning that Losifka doesn't mean at all, he should have said first, yes, they were counted, and then give you the reasons why, if they were counted, why were they counted separately? But that's not the way Rashi writes it. So therefore, that's not what Rashi's problem is in the first place, to teach us that Leisifkid means not to count at all. That's not what we hear about. The Rebbe is just clarifying first the pshat. What is Rashi coming to tell us over here? Rashi is coming to tell us only why was the tribe of Levi counted by themselves. That's the issue. Not that to tell us that they were counted, that the pasuk doesn't mean they weren't counted, but to tell us why they were counted by themselves. This is what Rashi is teaching us here. Ki im Rashi ba levayer, but Rashi is coming to explain. Madua nimna mata Levi levade. Why is the tribe of Levi been counted by themselves, not together with all the other tribes? That's Rashi's issue. And then Rashi gives two reasons why they were counted by themselves. So Aleph, number one, since they are the legion of the king, and therefore they were counted separately by themselves. And Beis, and number two, Kidei shal yu elu b'chlal, that they should not be included, hagzeira al kol hanimnim min ben esrim shana v'mayla shemusu Bamidbar. They should not be included in the gezeira that was for all those who were counted from 20 and up, the Shadan in Midbar. That's why they were counted separately. So the whole issue Rashi is addressing here is, why were they counted separately? That's all what Rashi is coming to tell us. So why does Rashi not have to also tell us that the meaning of the pasuk is not mean don't count them at all, but they were counted? We're saying that that's not what Rashi is saying, but the question is, how come Rashi is not saying that? Why is Rashi not bothered, and why is Rashi not coming to tell us? Why would Rashi not want to tell us that they were counted, the fact alone? Why is Rashi starting to explain why they were counted by themselves without first telling you that when the pasuk says don't count, doesn't mean not count at all. It means they don't count together with the Yid. Why doesn't Rashi explain that? And the Rebbe says, because that's not even a question for us to have to worry about, that they are counted, because that's something very obvious, as the Rebbe says. V'yesh loymar. And the Rebbe says we can say, Shaloi hutzrach Rashi lishloil hapirush hanal. The Rashi did not need to, was not necessary for Rashi to negate the misinterpretation in the word ad chasmati levi loisivkoid shamata levi lenimna klal. He doesn't even have to reject that interpretation that Levi wasn't counted at all, and to tell us that they were counted. Rashi has no need to tell us that. Why? Because when you look, because after Rashi has already explained in the beginning of the parsha that mitoich chiboson lefonov moizna oisom kol shah. The beginning of Parsha Bamidbar, Rashi says, why are we counting the Yidden over there again? And Rashi says because Hashem is their dear, chibosam. Because they're dear to Hashem, He counts them all the time. And as He says, when it comes to rest the Shechina, now we're setting up the Mishkan and the Shechina by the Yidden, the Eibshter counts them again. So if the counting is associated with those who are dear, of course that would include the Sevet Levi. They were the one that were the dearest of all the Shvatim. Move on bepashtus, ve'en kol safek. So it's very obviously, very simply understood, and there's no doubt Shemata Levi Nimna, that the Mata Levi was counted. On the contrary, Mata Levi are the first ones to be counted because they're the most dear. If the counting is an expression of the love and the dear, how dear they are to Hashem, of course the Levi was counted. So there was not even a question when it says Achas Mata Levi L'Sifka, they weren't counted at all, since the counting is associated with being dear to Hashem, and absolutely they were dear to Hashem. Elosharashi bo liyashiv hakovshi b'hakosu. What Rashi is coming to answer here, the difficulty of the verse. And the difficulty is that Mekivon shebe psukim shelifnei zeh, since in the psukim that preceded here, besipur protem minyan b'nei Yisrael, when the Torah relates the details, how the Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, were counted. Over there, it's very clear that the Bnei Levi weren't counted amongst them, because He counts all the tribes without Levi there. So this is evidence. When the pasuk says in the beginning, count the entire community of Bnei Yisrael, doesn't include Levi. They weren't counted. Levi. So he wasn't counted. Levi. Bim Kain Mahu Tam Hatzivui. So what's the reason Hashem is telling Achas Mate Levi Loisivkot Gomer B'Soich Bnei Yisrael that you don't count the Levi amongst the Bnei Yisrael? You don't count them. But we know that they weren't counted because we just read all the psukim. So why is the Eibishter commanding Moshe that the Bnei Levi don't count the Bnei Yisrael? Shemizeh mashma. So from this, it turns out, it appears, Shemer Chadish, the Torah is telling him, not to count him with the other Yidden. This is a command. We've already just finished learning that Suas Koladas Bnei Yisrael didn't include them because they weren't counted. So the fact they weren't counted means that they were not part of that. So why do we have to say, but don't count them? We already see that they were never supposed to be counted. The Koladas Bnei Yisrael does not include the Bnei Levi. So, maybe Rashi Shnei Taimim Kanal. So, what is the reason? So the pasuk is telling us don't count them. So what is the reason? Rashi brings two reasons why weren't they counted. Why weren't they counted? So the command over here is to say that don't count them together with the Bnei Yisrael, meaning they have to be separate. So that's what the pasuk is telling you. Make them separate. Why do they have to be separate? And Rashi brings the two reasons cannot. So what the Rebbe over here explained is, what is Rashi coming to tell us? The Rebbe says Rashi is not coming to tell us that the Bnei Levi were counted. Don't mistake that they weren't counted, because that's, and the Rebbe explains, why doesn't Rashi have to explain that? The Rebbe says because it's obvious that they were counted if counting is associated with being there. So it's obvious they weren't counted. So we don't have to even negate or reject an idea. Oh, maybe they weren't counted. We don't have to say we know they were counted. The only thing is, since we already know that they weren't counted as part of the Bnei Yisrael, because we see when it says Suas Rosh Hadas Bnei Yisrael, Levies are not counted. So what is the pasuk coming to tell us over here? Lo Sifkoit, meaning don't count them together with the Yidden. We see what is it meaning? That the pasuk is telling you that there's something special about them, that they should not be counted with the Yidden. Rashi gives you the two reasons why they shouldn't be counted amongst the rest of the Bnei Yisrael. Okay, that would be the pshat in the Rashi, that Rashi is coming to explain the pasuk, why the pasuk is saying count them not amongst the Bnei Yisrael, and because of the two reasons that the Eibishter says, don't count them together, because there are two reasons they shouldn't be counted, either because they're legion of the king, or because they should not be included in the decree of those who died from 20 years and on. But the Rebbe now in Noah's Beis is going to ask us three questions. Three questions. If this is what Rashi is coming to tell us, why they were counted separate, and that this was the command to count them separate. So the Rebbe has three questions. First of all, the heading of Rashi, that Rashi ignores the second part of the pasuk. So here is the issue, not to be counted of Bnei amongst Bnei Yisrael. Rashi just brings down the beginning of the pasuk. We'll see in a minute. And this issue that the Bnei Levi are not counted as part is already earlier. Rashi doesn't bring it over there earlier. And why does Rashi need two interpretations while the second interpretation seems even further than Pshat? Let's look inside. Base. Aval adayin tzorich lahavin, we still need to understand. While we explain what Rashi is coming to teach us here, we still have to understand. Aleph, number one. Pirusho shel Rashi, Rashi's interpretation, which explains what is Rashi's interpretation, why the Levi was counted, the tribe of Levi was counted by themselves. Biur hataimim lazeh, to explain the reasons. Shemata Levi nimna levade, why is the tribe of Levi counted by themselves? That is shayich gam lahatevis shebesefer dikro. They also are connected to the words in the end of the pasuk, which it says, "Ach, the Mata Levi lo tifkoit, don't count them. B'toich b'nei Yisrael." The words in the pasuk that follow is, "Don't count them amongst the b'nei Yisrael." And we're explaining what's the reason why they shouldn't be counted. Umadua lo hetik Rashi gam teves elu. So how come Rashi did not quote from the pasuk also the words "B'toich b'nei Yisrael"? Lo b'pirushei, not in the commentary. Rashi itself doesn't bring down those words. V'lo b'hadibur hamaschil, not in the heading. Rashi just brings down that as Achas Mata Levi Lo Tifkoid. Rashi brings down, doesn't say Lo Tifkoid B'Tzerch B'nei Yisrael. But the whole point of the Rashi is why we count him himself. Rashi doesn't bring down the words B'Tzerch B'nei Yisrael. Not in the commentary, not in the quote from the pasuk, Dibra Maskil. Rashi doesn't even hint it by saying etc., which would mean the further part of the pasuk. But here, this is what we're explaining. Why is Lo Sifkoit B'Sech B'nei Yisrael? That's seemingly the point that Rashi is coming to explain over here. So why doesn't Rashi bring them? Base, and number two, Hashayla Hanal, this above question, the question that we have, what is the question? What is the pasuk trying to tell you? Not to count the Levi. We saw they weren't counted. What's the novelty and what's the reason? What's the special uniqueness? Why they weren't counted, as we're trying to explain over here. This has already been aroused. This is already questioned. We should question this earlier in the pasuk. In the pasuk, it says, "V'halevim lemate avoisom lo hospogdu b'soichom." The Levim to the tribes of their fathers, meaning the Levim by their fathers Levim, were not counted amongst them. Shekam mizeh muchach. That also, because what is the pasuk telling you that lo hospogdu b'soichom? We can see over there, even that pasuk, sheyesh chidush shelo lifked es haLevim b'toichom. This is us. There's some novelty not to count them amongst the Yid, because we see that we didn't count them, but there's a reason. There's something. The pasuk is trying to tell you something here. So why did Rashi doesn't play there anything? So Rashi should have explained. They weren't counted because they're Ligin Shalmelech. They're not in the Gezerah of Ben Esrim Shon to die in the Midbar. Why does Rashi explain them? Rashi doesn't explain there nothing. He doesn't say. He's silent. Move on. So in that case, it's not understood. What is the special difficulty in this pasuk over here? That in this pasuk, Rashi needed to explain why they were counted by themselves. So if Rashi issue is, why is the pasuk telling us that they weren't counted? Because to tell us that there is some sort of uniqueness with the Levim, that they're not supposed to be counted together with everybody else for the two reasons that Rashi brings down. This is already earlier in the pasuk. It says they weren't counted amongst them, and the issue arises: why is the pasuk telling us they weren't counted amongst them? To tell you there's some chiddush. Rashi should have commented over there why they weren't counted. And the third question the Rebbe says, Ma'akoshe b'tamarishan de Rashi. Gimel, what is difficulty in the first Rashi's pshat? That Rashi says that Ligin Shel Melech is worthy to be counted alone. So what's the difficulty in that pshat? Shemishum zeh loy mistapik boy v'hebitam sheni. That it's not difficulty that Rashi is not satisfied with the first pshat, first interpretation, brings a second interpretation. So we need to know what's the problem with the first interpretation, that Rashi needs a second interpretation. Especially as the Rebbe says, it seems like the first interpretation is more fitting to the simple meaning of the pasuk. So what is the reason? Rebbe wants to know what's the reason why the first pshat is no good. Or why does Rashi need a second one? Especially that the second pshat is further away from the pshat. When you analyze it, the whole idea in the second pshat seems more medrashic, that they're not going to be included in that. And also in the flow of the psukim, it's difficult. As the Rebbe articulates, explains now. Ubifrat, especially we need explanation. Why do we need a second pshat? The second one seems further away from the style, from the path of the simple literal meaning of the pasuk. Hey mitzad klolus toichne, both the idea of the second pshat Sa'atam shenimnu levadom ukidei lahatzilo mehagzera. That the reason they were counted separately, that way they would be saved from the decree. Shatzov HaKodesh Baruch Hu Shasid Lamed. Hashem envisioned that the future there's going to be a gezerah in order to protect them. From that, he counted them separately. This is all in this whole pshat. Shekorov Yisrael Agodah Melipshuta Shel Mikra. This is closer to the Agodah style of learning more than the simple meaning of the pasuk. So, mitzad the toichen, why does Rashi need this pshat? What's wrong with the first one? But v'hein mitzadem shechakshuvim kanan. Also, the flow, the continuation of the verses also makes it difficult to understand. The pasuk shela'achar ezeh nemar, in the following pasuk, it is written, "Va'ato hafkid es halavim al mishkan ha'edus v'gomer." So the pasuk says, don't count them, but you put them in charge on the mishkan of the edus and to guard it. The mishkan, nobody should walk in there. So this follows this pasuk of don't count them together with the yid. So the hainu haminu usrara shalmate levi la mishkan, that describes the appointment and the dominance of the Mata Levi over the Mishkan. So, Vimke, Bishloima lepirush alo shel Rashi, according to the first interpretation that they're important, the pasuk tells you how are they important. Ligyon shel melech, because they're in charge to protect the Mishkan. So, according to the first shot, Shemata Levi nimna levade. Why did was he counted by himself? Because the Levi was the legion of the king. We understand the flow of these matters. This command, point them on the Mishkan, explains why they weren't counted, why that they weren't counted. That's the reason for not counting them with everybody else, because that's their unique mission, that they were the Legion of King. They're watching the Beis Hamikdash. We don't count them. They are the Legion of the King, and they're appointed the Mishkan Ha'edus, and that's why they're not counted. They're not together with everybody. They're unique. They're special. They're the Legion Shel Melech. So it fits the flow of the psukim, the hemshech. Don't count them because they're appointed to the Mishkan, to the service of the Mishkan. But according to the second pshat, not to be included in the Gezerah, ain't kan hemshech. There's no flow here. There's no continuation, seemingly. Between you count the Levim separate, appoint the Levim that follows, to not being counting them together with the rest of the Yidden. So the pasuk continues. They're appointed to the job of the Mishkan, but it doesn't have anything to do with the with the fact that you're not counting them. So there's no hemshech over here. So basically, both. The whole concept of this idea that Hashem doesn't want them to be part of the punishment because of they shouldn't be counted from 20 is more agodic to begin. But also the flow, the hemshech of the pasuk doesn't fit in there, and it fits much better, fits properly according to the first one. And the Rebbe says first, according to the second Pirush, Havle Lichtav Kan. So here, what should have been written in order to fit the flow, Loi v'ata hafke the salvim goimer, not you should appoint the Levim, elo haposuk shebehemshech haparsha. Over there, you have to say the posuk that is later on in the parsha. What does it say? It says, "V'ani hine lokachti es halevim metoich b'nei Yisrael v'hoyu li halevim." Posuk says, "I've taken for myself the Levim from amongst the Yidden. They should be mine." And over there, why did Hashem take them? Because they didn't do the Chet HaEgel. That pasuk would have been fitting to follow. Don't count them, and you make them special for me because they didn't do the Egel. That's why they become mine, as Rashi explains over there. Behesem lahatam shenitzlu halvim min hagizera. That would fit the reason why the Levim were saved from the Gzeira. Rashi says we don't want them to be counted from 20 and up. And Rashi says that the reason is because they are mine. So that fits the reasoning that Rashi says, according to the second Rashi, Rashi, and this would fit with Rashi by saying, why does Hashem say Nelokachti Salivim, the Lekicha Salivim Hoiso, that when did the taking, when did Hashem make the Levim his? When they sit with the Egel, V'halavim Shlo Yavdu, as Rashi quotes later on, they were chosen because they did not worship and they did not participate in the Avodah Zarah, in the Egel, in the Avodah Salili. So that would be a more fitting continuation if the reason why you should not count them, not to count them, is because the Eibster wants to protect them from the Gzeira, and the reason he wants to protect them, Rashi says, because they didn't make a mistake in the Egel, then they would follow by the next pasuk, and I've taken them to me. The Eibster took them to me when everybody else failed, and they didn't. So that would be a flow. But here, the flow of the psukim that they're appointed to the Mishkan seems more to be fitting with the first reasoning. So why is Rashi bringing a second reason? It seems to be fitting that because they're the Ligin Shomelach, that's why they get this special position of being chosen, and they need to be counted by themselves because of that. So basically, the Rebbe's question is, why do we need a second pshat? What's wrong with the first pshat? But the Rebbe only answers, the Rebbe only adds that the second pshat seems to be distant from the simple meaning of the pasuk. Both the whole idea is more agodic than pshat, and the flow of the verses doesn't fit. So why does Rashi need the second pshat? Why is Rashi not satisfied with the first one? And that's on top of the first two questions. If Rashi's trying to just explain why that the chiddush of the pasuk that they won't count it part with everybody, with everyone, why does Rashi not bring down B'soich B'nei Yisrael, which would say that they're separate from the B'nei Yisrael? And also this concept Rashi seemingly could have explained earlier. So this all tells us that there's something more to this Rashi than just telling us that they were counted by themselves, and the reason why they were counted is something more in Rashi here, as the Rebbe will continue to explain now.